Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. I'm Robert Schoenberger with IndustryWeek, and welcome to Production Pulse, our regular chat about issues facing the manufacturing world. I'm joined today by Dave Blanchard, who is editor-in-chief of EHS Today, one of my partners over here at Endeavor Business Media, who really focuses in on that environmental health and safety topic. And Jeff Postelwait, who is the managing editor of T&D World, our publication that looks into transmission and distribution. And I invited them to talk today because, well, it's really hot outside. It's upper 80s right now from my home in the Chicago area, with a high of 91 expected a little later today. And the entire eastern half of the country is under massive heat advisories because of the record temperatures and high humidity that have been really hitting everywhere from Maine all the way through Florida. Well, I guess they're used to it in Florida, but maybe not so much in Maine. So that just begs a question for the manufacturing world. What can you do when it gets this nasty outside? And for that, I was hoping to start with you, Dave. It's dangerous to have workers in an enclosed space working with heavy machinery that can generate its own heat when the heat outside is this high. What can companies do to keep people safe at times like this?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. The thing about heat is it's summertime. It's always going to get hot, but it just keeps getting hotter and hotter, and the situation doesn't seem to be cooling off, as they say. Whenever the temperature starts to spike, which, you know, it's going to do that once summertime hits, maybe not with the intensity that we're seeing right now. It's just important. The number one thing is to be important to be vigilant about what heat stress is and how to protect yourself and how to protect your workers. I mean, people are usually pretty, they make sure that, if they see a dog in a car, they say, oh, you got to make sure that, turn on the windows and keep them out of the sunshine. But they're not always as, proactive about themselves. According to OSHA, which, tracks these kind of things for the workplace, heat stress or heat exposure is the number one cause of death among all the hazardous weather conditions in the United States. So it's a big deal. It's something to be concerned about. Now, it's particularly important, as you mentioned, for anybody who works outside. That could be construction workers or agricultural workers or even people on a oil and gas platform, something like that. But it's just important for anybody, any kind of worker in any kind of facility, especially when it's really hot and maybe it's not very well ventilated inside. So what is heat stress? Let's go through that real quick. Heat stress, some of the common signs would be sweating, sweating heavily, having a fever, dry, hot skin, feeling faint or dizzy or, lethargic, reduced appetite, being irritable. Now, irritable could be interpreted a lot of different ways, I guess. But another sign would be decreased urine output. In intense situations, could be twitching or having painful muscle cramps in your arms, your legs, your abdomen. And then feeling thirsty. Now, the best way to deal with being thirsty, of course, drink more water. That seems pretty logical, pretty self-evident. And there are a number of recommendations. I think the one I saw is that workers should drink 1 cup of water for every 20 minutes or so. Now, we live in a very heavily politicized environment. I guess it's always been that way. But you would think that worker safety might not be an area that anyone would have much of a debate about. Well, that's not the case. Everything gets debated these days. With heat, now OSHA actually has a heat standard that they, you can't say it passed, but they recommended it towards the end of the Biden administration. So when Biden rolled over to the Trump administration, things kind of just went static. So there are currently public hearings being held on OSHA's heat injury and illness prevention rule, and that's ongoing. And I think it's going to be at least until early July that they're going to be talking about it, having public hearings about it. So whether that actually gets passed into a standard or not, stay tuned. But
so what sort of things are What sort of new rules would that put on manufacturers if that standard becomes the new rule?
Well, things like mandating heat breaks or rest breaks, um, and the debate is, well, what kind of companies is that applied to? If I have workers working outside, it might be hard for like let's say an agricultural setting, like a farm or something like that. Well, does that mean I have to bring all my workers into an air conditioned area every 20 minutes or every half an hour, or how often do I have to do that? How often do do I have to put in air conditioning? Do I have to put in big shades or some kind of a rest break situation? If I take workers off of the line, if they're working on an assembly line or some kind of a manufacturing situation, what's that going to do to my productivity? All these kind of things become subject to debate. When the basic premise is you don't want to have somebody getting sick or falling dizzy or heat prostration or anything negative like that. The best way to do that is just to let them take a break and drink some water. But then say, well, if they drink a lot of water, then they're going to have to use the restroom. Blah 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 blah. Those kind of things are very much amongst the debate. All right, so the question would be, what should you do? What can you do? What can companies do to keep the workers safe from heat stress? You don't necessarily have to wait for OSHA to tell you what's common sense here. Besides recommending that your workers should drink water, maybe just let them have a bottle of water next to their station, and take a break. If you're feeling like you're going to pass out, it's better that you just sit down and catch your breath and get under shade if you're working outside, or go into air conditioning. Or if there's no air conditioning, just should have a big ventilation fan, something. It seems like it's a no-brainer, but sometimes you just have to do that. Other things that they're being recommended, this is part of OSHA's proposed rule, but you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to wait for OSHA to mandate it. Just do whatever makes common sense. A buddy system. Have your workers well trained on knowing what their body should be feeling like, and knowing if they see signs of their workers. Like if you see a worker, doing a lot of they're nodding off, or looks like they're just not feeling well. I mean, that's pretty easy to spot. You just have to be vigilant about making sure you're doing that kind of thing. You're spotting what your coworkers are how they're looking and how they're acting. Can't emphasize this enough. Just train your workers how to spot what it looks like when somebody's under heat stress. There's a lot of I went through some of the obvious ways. Now, not everybody's going to tell you, I'm feeling kind of sick or I'm feeling dizzy, but you can kind of spot that. I guess one last thing I could point out, and some of this is being some new technologies are being promoted or being sponsored by organizations such as the National Safety Council, and some companies are just developing it on their own, hoping that that's their business. They're like a lot of wearable devices now. I mean, you can just put like a smart watch or something, but some devices that you can take into the workplace, and some companies will provide them to the workers if they're working outside or in dangerous areas. They can collect your heart rate, your pulse rate, your temperature, all sorts of different health-related data that can indicate that there's early signs of heat stress. Lots of apps are available out there. Can provide real-time feedback to a worker's general health. This is more in the developmental stages. Some companies are developing things like rapid body cooling solutions. So if you need to be brought down, your temperature brought down quickly, they're developing that. There are drones that companies can deploy out in rural areas that can map out exactly where heat stress is most likely to occur. They're kind of the ultimate heat map sort of situation.
Sounds like there are a lot
of line.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of technological solutions are on the way. I mean, your point about training, I mentioned before when we were talking before the event started today that I grew up in Houston, where being taught about how to
Yeah.
spot heat stress. We started that in elementary school, if I remember. It was one of those. It was a big enough problem that everyone had training on that, and I don't think that made it. There might have been that kind of focus up here in Chicago, or where you are in Cleveland, or even where Jeff is out in the Pacific Northwest, where there weren't these histories of very, very hot summers. So that education is pretty critical. So moving on to you, Jeff. We've talked a little bit about what we can do for individual workers, but what about the utilities? I mean, this is a lot of stress is hitting the grid right now. A lot of people are turning the air conditioners up at home, and a lot of factories still want to stay running. So do we have enough power?
That is a question that's being asked a lot, even within the utility sector itself. In these conferences, these conversations that we have with itself, if you look at a graph of energy demand, it's been pretty boring for a while. We had, as we alluded to, the advent of widespread use of air conditioning.
I'm sorry, Jeff. Your feed is cutting out just a little bit. Can you maybe lean just a little closer to your microphone?
Oh, you auditory? Okay, yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so we had the advent of widespread use of air conditioning maybe 60 years ago, 50 years ago, depending on the area of the country. And and so then after that, it was pretty boring for a while. But now we're having some spikes and some predicted spikes in the future of energy demand. And not only are there going to be spikes, but they're saying that they might be lasting as well. They might be into the indefinite future. And that's being driven by things like the adoption of electric vehicles, that's being driven by electrifying homes and new construction. It's being residential growth as well as increases in commercial and industrial activity. So all of those things are conspiring to really push those numbers up. And yeah, it is a very valid question. How are we going to keep the lights on given all of that? My colleague Christina Marsh wrote recently at T&D World about how the DOE and the Georgia Public Service Commission, they're I mean it's warm in Georgia, right? So they're announcing some actions that are aimed at addressing the growing strain on the grid. The Energy Secretary Chris Wright. This week, he issued an emergency order under the Federal Power Act, and that authorizes Duke Energy, one of their utilities in the United States, to operate some of their generating units, some of their power plants at a higher capacity than they normally would to meet peak electricity demand caused by extreme temperatures. And that can be really important because obviously high temperatures can put stress and strain on the grid physically itself. It can make power plants less efficient if it's extreme enough. But anyway, policies like this and other ones are just sort of aimed at exactly what you were saying. It's aimed at reliability through what you might call a disaster. I mean, a heat wave can be a disaster for the grid. So beyond that, we have the massive increase in global electricity demand. Accenture is saying that the demand is jumping past 4% for the first time since the 2000s. And so one of the other ways, since a lot of this is being driven by big tech, right? The utilities are now having to work with what they call hyperscalers. They're hyperscaler customers. And those are people like Google and Microsoft, Meta, NVIDIA, to bring some of their operations online more gradually. I mean, it's still big. We're still talking about, megawatts and gigawatts. We're talking about a lot of electricity. But if they bring them on more gradually, and they also can discuss rates that give them a discount if they use power during off-peak hours where electricity is more plentiful and cheaper, during better weather. They use similar programs like that as with electric vehicles, for example. So if you have an electric vehicle, you're going to drive it home and you're going to You're going to hook it into your garage or wherever, and you're going to go inside, turn on the TV, and maybe crank down the AC a few degrees, right, in hot weather. So that, if everyone does that at the same time, that's a big problem. So they have certain utilities will have time of use incentives, so that they'll make it so that if you charge your EV overnight when electricity is less in demand, then you get a cheaper rate. Or they also have smart devices with smart chargers with two-way communication that it's sort of like your phone when you plug your phone in and it charges the battery more consistently throughout the night so that it's better for your battery health long term. It's a bit like that, except more with the grid health in mind. So there are things that can be done to sort of shave that peak demand off a little bit, even though, I mean, I'm curious as to how it's going to go myself. We're going to need a little bit more than peak shaving. We're going to need to build our way out of this, really. We're going to need to build power plants. We're going to need to build transmission lines. It's going to be a lot of steel and a lot of concrete, and it's going to take some work.
You mentioned the data centers, and that's something we've been tracking in a lot of different ways. But the number of major manufacturing companies in the electrical space right now building entire new factories to make more switchgear because of this demand for data center electricity use. Does this mean we should be really careful about asking ChatGPT about how to handle high temperatures in the middle of the afternoon when the temperatures are high, because it'll create that massive load on the system?
Yeah, it's tempting to think about it that way. I do sometimes question the overall societal value of, well, do we want to have electricity to keep us cool, or do we want to store grandma's pictures of kids on Facebook in some warehouse in Virginia somewhere? But yeah, the Chicagoland area where you're coming from is becoming a growing market for data centers. Texas is a big one. People are moving in to develop crypto and other computing heavy operations because they have cheap electricity. Out in Virginia is another one, and a lot of those are United States government secure sites, Pentagon servers, FBI servers, all that stuff. So, what these have in common is they're all incredibly energy intensive, and they are all sort of clustered, in a small area. They're not distributed throughout as they might want them to be if you're an engineer designing the perfect grid. You would not design it, right? And in fact, some of these places where they're seeing retiring plants, big centralized power plants like ancient coal plants, they've gone offline. And then what data center people, developers will do is they'll come in and they'll say, oh, look at all this great connection transmission system. This is great for us. So let's put our plant here. But what you've now done is you've taken something that creates 1,000, 1,200 megawatts of energy, and now you have some costs that actually, so it's completely reversed the grid was built, which is why I said earlier, we are going to have to eventually build our way out of this problem, and that's going to take time, and that's going to take reindustrialization in North America. It's going to take re-onshoring, and that is going to take. It's going to take. I mean, there's a lot of talk about domestic manufacturing, but we are a global economy. We've built over the past however many decades, we've built a global economy to the extent where the special metals that we need to make big pad mounted transformers, they don't mill that anymore in North America, or there's only one or two plants left that do. We get most of it from Ukraine, where there's wars happening. We get it from China and Korea and Vietnam, where there might be tariffs now happening. We get it from South America, where there's transportation costs may be steeper. So it is still a global economy, regardless of what any particular administration or any particular Congress may say. That's the way it's built, and that's what we have. And so if we're going to build new American manufacturing and the new grid that's going to make, we still are going to need to rely on that global economy to get it done. And that's not just goods and services, that's also the people that make that happen.
Mhm.
We have very few people in the United States who are getting an education to be electrical engineers and then staying here and performing those tasks. A lot of them, at least in this sector, at least in the utility sector, they may go work for big tech, for example, or they may go overseas to test transformers or what have you, or design power plants. But very few are staying here. It's not considered to be like a particularly interesting job, I guess, but it is absolutely essential.
We will see how this all works out. I mean, hopefully, it sounds like we're going to get some relief from the heat short term over the next few days. But this is a growing problem with rising demand for electricity and higher temperatures. This isn't going to be the last time we talk about how to handle the heat for the manufacturing world. But Jeff, thank you so much. We are out of time today. But Jeff from T&D World and Dave from EHS Today, thanks for your time today, and for you in the audience. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.